Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum is located in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Between 1975 and 1979, over 18,000 men, women, and children were imprisoned, tortured, and exterminated by the Khmer Rouge at this site alone, known as S21. This site was one of many across the country. Today, the museum is the most visited genocide memorial in Cambodia and one of the most visited sites in Phnom Penh. Its mission is to preserve and present evidence of the past and to keep alive the memory of those who died. The tangible holdings of the museum include the buildings themselves and thousands of witness-bearing objects. These include paper and photographic archives, shackles, instruments of torture, and human remains. Thousands of pieces of victims' clothing, gathered in the days and weeks following the fall of the Khmer Rouge, have been an important tool for illustrating the huge number of lives lost at S21 since the site was converted to a museum and memorial. Clothing has been on display since the museum opened more than 40 years ago, but the way it has been displayed has changed over time. We believe that the current collection of garments is just a fraction of what was originally collected. After years of unregulated exposure to the harsh tropical climate, these fragile materials were at risk of being lost. Additional information about the history of the site and the clothing collection can be found in the published conference preprints. The spark of this textile preservation project occurred in 2015. Then Director Visut Che asked Julia Brennan to visit and advise on how to care for the clothing collection. The clothing had not been inventoried and was unsorted, stored in plastic bags and totes. The clothing was damaged from pests, high temperature and relative humidity conditions, and years of accumulated dust and soiling. Through this initial assessment and the dedication of Mr. Che, efforts to preserve these objects were begun. 2 successive grants were awarded by the United States Fund for Cultural Preservation. Jackie Peterson Grace joined the project as a graduate student in 2017, and the textile preservation efforts have been ongoing since 2017. The unique circumstances of Tuol Sleng and its witness-bearing textile and clothing collections required us to carefully reconsider and redefine what best practices are. Conservation actions needed to be specific to this site, the social, cultural, and emotional history of the genocide, and the future needs and use of the objects themselves. In early discussions with stakeholders, it became clear that the standard practices applied in many museums were not possible or appropriate for this collection. Being present on the grounds of Tuol Sleng elicits a strong and powerful emotional response that must be addressed in a deeply personal manner. Daily interaction with the garments, accessories, shoes, wallets, belts, and bags was a constant reminder of the importance of the collection. Each garment bears a strong emotional charge. It represents the individual story of one human being, a mother, a father, or a child, one of thousands of victims and survivors who suffered. Clothing is universal, familiar, functional, and deeply personal. Paying respect to these individual stories and their capacity for healing and hope was at the very core of each action and each discussion throughout the project. This formed the foundation for all decision-making. Given these circumstances, the work needed to begin with conversation. Stakeholders that were consulted throughout the project included staff of the museum, survivors, family members of victims, and scholars. These conversations were fundamental to understanding the priorities of preservation efforts, which extended far beyond slowing the material degradation of the physical objects. In some cases, the active use of an object to display the truth prevailed over a long-term vision of preservation. These discussions and listening sessions continue today as a hallmark of the project. They inspire adjustments to workflow and protocols. There were prevailing themes that appeared throughout these conversations. Everyone recognized that these textiles were not just physical evidence of the atrocities committed, but touchstones for healing and reconciliation. Our colleague Sukli put it this way: the importance of the clothes at TSGM is important evidence for humanity, inside and outside the country, and to study and understand the living conditions and hardships of the people during the Khmer Rouge era. Conservation helps make everyone consider, understand, and prevent this event happening in the future. Coupled with this sensitive, respectful, and collaborative model, and the requirement for present and future accessibility, were other standard conservation challenges. Any collections care protocol needed to address the tropical Cambodian climate in a sustainable and practical manner. Solutions needed to be suitable for the museum's collection care staff and fit the budgetary constraints of the project. All of these factors called for a creative, flexible, and open-minded approach to this preservation project. The Tuol Sleng conservation staff had little experience with organic collections and no experience with clothing prior to this project. Consequently, a holistic introduction to preservation and collections care through site-specific and object-based training was a primary focus of each in-person visit. These weeks spent together also formed the foundation for building friendship, confidence, and ongoing, locally motivated preservation work. Preventive conservation was at the heart of all training and hands-on work. Initial workshops focused on the Canadian Conservation Institute's 10 agents of deterioration and how they translate specifically to Tuol Sleng. Through this framework, overall risks to the site were identified in hands-on team exercises. Other preventive conservation activities included discussions about inert materials for storage and exhibition, exploration of conservation materials brought from the United States, and sourcing locally available materials that could be used in their place. These in-person training sessions also introduced basic textile conservation techniques like hand stitching, vacuum surface cleaning, and learning terminology to describe textiles and clothing. In conjunction with these workshops, the team developed bilingual, illustrated workflows to suit the specific needs of the Tuol Sleng collection. Long-term preservation of these high-risk textiles was the collective goal. Consensus drove a pragmatic approach to triage and long-term care. Best practices for collections care in Western museums were not possible or appropriate for this collection. However, they aided in creating an adaptable and flexible framework that was tailored and modified to the needs of the clothing. Informed by initial discussions with stakeholders, the team decided that surface cleaning was an important first step in the triage of the collection. Surface cleaning was performed with a locally purchased variable speed vacuum supplemented with soft brushes. Removing the top layer of surface soiling helped to make the objects more recognizable and understandable, so they can serve the purpose of providing proof and memory. Surface cleaning was also necessary to remove large surface incrustations and insects to slow down the degradation of the textiles. The deeper soiling, including the stains of use and marks of each individual object's history, were to remain. The removal of surface soiling often revealed additional information, including lettering on military accessories. There are over 200 textiles that exhibit unique and identifying features, including little girls' dresses, a tapestry handbag, fragments of traditional silk, and shirts and pants that have been repeatedly repaired. The soiling removed during the process of cleaning was separated and saved. Respect for the deceased, whom these textiles represent, was a powerful underpinning and guide for all preservation protocols. From a forensic basis, the preservation of these materials may serve to provide more information in the future. More than 60 caps have embroidered names of individuals. These findings, now cataloged and recorded, provide important information for deeper study and will continue to contribute to the understanding of this site. Methods for addressing fragmentary pieces of the collection drew on approaches from field archaeology and forensics. For surface cleaning large batches of fragments, we used a locally built sifter. The groups of objects were shaken, sifted, and untangled. Objects deemed to be valuable or unique by Tuol Sleng staff, like a single gold earring or a fragment of silk krima, were removed to be stored separately. The fragments were photographed and stored as batches, and the dislodged soiling was collected for storage. For now, this method rendered these unrecognizable textiles a bit cleaner and identifiable, and much more accessible for future study, analysis, and conservation intervention. Given the perishable conditions of the collection and the site, and the awareness that we cannot preserve these objects in perpetuity, it was decided that written and photographic documentation was crucial to preservation. The documentation is a physical record, a placeholder for the artifact. It serves the long-term view that continuous control and protection of all the textiles may not be possible, given the uncertainties of available supplies, future staffing, political and social changes, and climate change. Each object that was whole enough to be recognizable was photographed with a digital camera and tagged with an accession number. Its condition and identifying features were recorded with written documentation on a paper long form and in a brief Excel database. These systems provide flexibility for future decisions made by the museum, like adopting a museum-wide collections management database. The other compelling reason for extensive bilingual documentation was to make the textile collection accessible for study, continued research, and cross-referencing with other archives and court records. Unique objects in the collection, like prints or repairs, may be identifiable in archival images. The images of garments can be shared with families of those who were killed at S21, providing another avenue for healing and reconciliation. Following the extensive work of documentation and surface cleaning, the fragile organic materials required a sustainable, long-term storage solution to protect against the harmful environmental factors that have resulted in significant degradation over the last 40 years. Much of the Tuol Sleng complex remains an open-air museum, maintained as it was found after the fall of the Khmer Rouge in 1979. Buildings are open to the outside climate, bringing the challenges of year-round high temperature and relative humidity conditions, rain and flooding during the monsoon season, and pollution and dust from surrounding busy streets. Even the conservation lab, where so much of the daily care takes place, is an open-air room that bears scars as one of the original torture cells of the prison. Windows open on either side of the room to the traffic and museum visitors. To address these factors, we adapted seed storage technology from the agriculture sector. The collection is stored in custom-made boxes. The boxes are fitted with gaskets to make them almost airtight, and the interior temperature and relative humidity conditions are displayed with built-in hygrometers. The interior relative humidity conditions of the boxes are controlled with clay desiccant beads, placed in the boxes until the desired relative humidity is reached and then removed. The beads can be indefinitely regenerated in a locally purchased convection oven. The boxes are able to hold the desired relative humidity conditions for months before the beads must be reintroduced. This system is cost-effective, sustainable, and does not rely on electricity like an environmental control system would. The project has demanded a continuous re-examination of our roles as outside specialists and personal reflection on our skills. By learning about the culture, language, and religion of our Cambodian colleagues, we began to understand the subtleties of how to look at, see, and talk about this history through the lens of these textiles. We may impart technical guidance, but it was adapted and shaped by our colleagues. As relationships grew over a 3-year period, so did the flow of information. The exchange of skills, ideas, stories, and emotions was fundamental to the success of the project. Sharing meals and break times, celebrating birthdays, and getting to know family members were central to this process of building lasting relationships that resulted in professional collaborations. This is an essential part of learning from each other. When the pandemic ended travel and work on site, Julia met weekly with the textile team over Zoom. Through these regular meetings, a familiarity and friendship was fostered. It's possible that the distance actually enhanced independence and self-reliance. The team unified as a more interconnected conservation department. They formulated overall goals, identified specific roles, and took responsibility for particular tasks like environmental monitoring. In 2020, the team conducted the first risk assessment of all the collections on display. The weekly Zoom meetings helped build confidence and stimulated new ideas. Other self-directed improvements have also been made to the exhibition spaces in the past year. The conservation team determined that one of the display cases containing clothing was causing long-term damage to the collection. The large pile of objects were subjected to pests like termites and mice and exposed to light and dust. The original exhibit design portrayed the extensive loss of life by displaying a large volume of clothing. The team felt it was important to keep this design aesthetic, but wanted to protect the objects at the bottom of the pile. A project plan was outlined and discussed with the director. Through sketches and mock-ups, new and improved mount supports were tested and fabricated by the conservation team, with virtual support from Julia. The end result is a much improved textile display that tells the story of loss while prioritizing long-term care of the artifacts. Recently, the team decided to remove very degraded straw mats from display. Watching these original, witness-bearing artifacts continue to degrade during months of the pandemic with no visitors inspired them to take actions to preserve them. They did extensive documentation, designed and created suitable storage housing for the straw mats. The team continues to tackle conservation challenges with creative problem-solving skills, like how to convert the lab space for photo documentation of large objects. These solutions are based on the fundamental principles shared during the initial phases of the textile preservation project. Currently, the whole team at Tuol Sleng is creating an exhibition about the project to preserve the textiles. Their design process has included writing text, selecting images, formatting the layout, and working with the museum's exhibition team and director to tell the whole story of the textile collection and the recent efforts to preserve it. This project is their vision and will tell their story. In reflecting on the work that has taken place over the past 5 years, the real value of the project is much more nuanced than the initial project goals stated. The team at Tuol Sleng has grown in number and strengthened their collections care knowledge. They have moved far beyond basic principles to embrace a holistic approach to care of tangible material culture and to learn more about the stories and the intangible value of these objects. The conservation team at Tuol Sleng is now a national asset, and the conservators plan to continue to share their knowledge with other collections care teams and allied fields across the country. This memorial site is undoubtedly of profound importance to Cambodians, but its impact extends far beyond the materiality of the physical objects. Our colleague Sukpen said, "Through textiles, I feel compassion beyond compassion that is difficult to speak." The power of these familiar physical materials to tell a story of loss and help healing bonded our team in a very special way. Our shared goals were met when each member of the team contributed their own experiences, skills, and hopes. This work is emotionally demanding and always will be, but building an enduring collaboration through shared experiences has been fundamental to viewing this project as a process of healing and rebuilding. The work at Tuol Sleng remains in progress, to be continued by our colleagues. This project has been built on collaboration from the very beginning, and we are tremendously grateful for the hard work and dedication of so many who contributed to its success.